You need to learn Spring Framework right now. Look, Java development is evolving fast. And if you're still writing code the old-fashioned way, managing dependencies, wiring objects yourself, you're already behind. But here's the deal. The best developers, the ones who build scalable, high-performance applications, aren't doing things the hard way. They are using Spring Framework. And at the heart of a Spring, it all starts with Spring Core. I will delving into the 6 key concepts that covers Spring Core, and that is the fundamental concepts to learn Spring Framework truly. So let me explain you that I will be showing you the dependency injection concept, IOC container, what is the IOC principle, how the IOC container manages beans, and how can we take leverage from that capability. Verify these concepts by the end of this video, and not just like that. I will be delving into examples and showing you how you can practical apply your knowledge that in this part theoretically you will be acquiring, but then you can apply it to real examples. So without any other ado, let's get started. So I want you to understand that the container of a Spring Framework, it's just like a box. And in this box, you can store many objects as you want, and so that you can tell Spring Framework which object do you want him to take care of for you, so that you cannot manage it all yourself. And by this explanation I am telling you is what inversion of control mean. Why? Because inversion of control means directly that Spring, in this case, because there are other languages that can apply this term also, but in Spring Framework, inversion of control is taken care by the Spring Framework itself. And Spring Framework is capable of doing so by utilizing as a medium the container that has integrated within. And so in this case, Spring Framework will get apply the concept of inversion of control by taking care of your objects. And those objects, we're going to be naming them as beans. So in this case, I want you to understand that all of the objects that I am going to be incorporating into the Spring container, picture them as they are named as beans, right? So we can create, as I have told you, many objects as we want. So this bean, for example, will be headed to the Spring container. Also, we can create another object that is also be contained into the Spring container. So in this case, what I am trying to exemplify here is that you can create as many objects as you want to Spring taking care of your objects and not by yourself. And I want to contrast this situation by picturing again the concept that we traditionally do when we are programming in Java programming language as pure Java code. As you may already know that we can create many objects as we want, but traditionally by this way. Let's imagine that we want to create a task object, right? You have a class that is named task, and we want to create a task named task1, and you will explicitly naming and instantiating by writing the new keyword. So in this way, you are traditionally creating the object. So Spring Framework will do this instead of ourselves, right? So I want you to get clarified this concept first. Before to pass to the practical concepts that I have already prepared for you to exemplify you in code. And also, I have explained to you what are beans, how do we create beans, that we are going to see them in a minute with code. POJOs itself are just classes that will be holding data. And in contrast to managed beans, the POJOs, I want you to picture this way. A POJO is not going to be taken care by yourself. But Spring Framework will be take care of this. So let's say that you want to create a Pojo and directly goes to the Spring container. So to make this action, you have to declare it first and tell the Spring Framework that you want to convert it to a managed being. So Spring Container will understand that the Pojo will be created by himself, not by you. You will just declare when to inject that object, and by meaning to injecting the objects, I am referring that, for example, if you want to create a bean, or getting back a bean to your code, we will just declare what of the beans that are managed into the Spring container to utilize yourself into the code. Let's say that you are into the Java main method class and you want to bring back the bean 1. In this case, you will tell the Spring container that you want the bean 1 to be injected. And also you can declare it namedly as objects that are already stored into the Spring container singularly. And I will show you in a minute that. So by dependency injection here in this case, I will be applying this concept by telling Spring Framework which one of the objects that are already stored into the container of a Spring to incorporate into my code and utilize for just purposes of dependencies into the class that are being needed. So this action is known by dependency injection. And this is all the graphical explanation that I want you to understand first before passing to the code. And you can see here that these concepts of IOC container and Spring context may be a little bit related each other, but I want you to highlight this first. The IOC container is like the interface of the Spring context, because Spring is the dedicated version of the interface that the interface offers to the class. I mean, graphically, we can understand this as a model first. Let's say that the IOC container has such capabilities to offer for those who implement this interface, right? I want you to picture this because I want you to introduce yourself already with code concepts just to understand. And when we say that we want to implement this interface of IOC container, we already know that when we implement such interface, we are getting back all of the behavior that are declared within this contract. And by incorporating or implementing it into a dedicated class that we will be naming this as Spring context. So Spring context will be inheriting all of the behavior and all of the contracts that are defined into the IOC container, and so that Spring context will be making use of such capabilities. So Spring context also adheres more behavior so that you can directly use the Spring context and not the IOC container, because the IOC container is just the concept of itself. I want you to understand that the IOC container will be just intended to clarify that will be containing objects. But Spring context is a dedicated container that this container is the one that we are going to be using in our code. And so I want you to clarify this and having this concept clarified by making this contrast and making this example from the interface and the class, because it's very commonly seen to see people that get confused these two concepts. And so to get clarified this, Spring context is the dedicated class to offer you the dependency injection and to host all of the as much as you want managed beans to be created into the container and offer you the capability to inject them into your code. So that's the difference between Spring Context and the IOC container. So now let's get to the code. So first, the application will consist into three parts. We're going to be dividing first into an interface, and the interface will be implemented by three main classes that will going to be exemplifying a general tasks. Each one of them will be retrieved as a bean, so that we are going to be implementing the managed beans by the application context. Also, there will be a configuration class that Spring Context will be needing, and that's so I will teach you how to make that configuration class, and you will see that it's a specific that there is a specific configuration annotation to make so. And also, I will be making the repository public of this project so you can revise them anytime you want. So let's now pass to the code. So in the project I have prepared for you, what I have here is a lot of classes right now, but it's divided into three main packages right here. But before passing to the explanation of the code, that also I have it on the repo, GitHub repo, but I want to explain you how did I create this project. And if you are used to create Java projects, you are always used to be heading to the file section here and just give it a name right here to the project. And just give it a name and leave it as it is, right? But the thing that differs from a pure Java project and a Spring project is the dependency integration that we are making here. This tells to the project that we are going to be purely using Java and Spring specific features, such as integrating the application context, allowing us to create managed beans for the Spring container to understand them and reach them out whenever we want and apply the dependency injection that I have just told you. So I want to explain you here that what I have done here. I have created three main packages here and also a main class. The main class is the place that I will be able to retrieve all of what I have into the context. And so here we are instantiating the context in the way of annotation configuration. And this tells Spring that all of the behavior that will be reaching for Beans creation will be coming from annotations and not from XML based configurations, because there are two ways to instantiate the context and to save Beans. The first one is the older one that is based on XML files, but we are not incorporating this here because that way is not very used nowadays. But the annotation way is now the common way for creating Spring Beans and generally creating Spring projects. As you can see here, this class, this constructor accepts a parameter, and this parameter is merely from the configuration class. The configuration class is the class and the place that will be telling the behavior to the context of what beans are being created into the context and which are going to be the models for the component scanning. And what is the component scanning? What is that definition? Well, models and can be understood also as POJOs. POJOs is the thing that I have explained you in the 30 part. And the POJOs is like the transient objects that you can create for storing data, and it's managed by you, right? But it can be converted to Spring managed beans for the Spring container to be managing for you. So In order to do that, you have to annotate all the whole class with the component annotation. And by this, you are telling to Spring that this whole class will be treated as a bean, right? So I want you to get understood that this whole logic is separated by concerns. And the objective of this application is like to make a to-do list, right? And I can reach that objective of separating concerns by making an interface. This is only basic knowledge that we are used to understand by creating Java applications. This is not knowledge related to Spring, but I just want you to highlight that I have separated this app into the modularity that you can see here right now, and I can implement it as if I were creating just a traditional Java application, but I can integrate Spring right now here by just exemplifying you that I can annotate it to be as a managed bean, right? So by the time I have annotated is here as a bean, the configuration beans treat it as now as component. And you can see here the logo of a Spring that now Spring is treating this whole class as a component. And you can see here that if I quit this, Spring will not be treating this whole class as a bean. And you can see here that there aren't the Spring logo here anymore because Spring is not treating it as a managed bean to incorporate into its container. So I will put it again, and you can see there that there's a leaf from the Spring logo. But I will be focusing on this component and in the configuration class. So having explained to you why did I annotate this whole class as a component, I gotta tell you what are the beneficials for having annotated with component annotation. So for this, let me head out to the configuration class again, and you can see here that apart from having configured this as a bean, because also this is another thing, we have to annotate the configuration class that Spring application context will be using as a bean, because Spring context will understand from a bean to bean, right? And the communication will be surging from the bean so that Spring Container can integrate another bean that this bean will be annotated as configuration. So this is why I have passed here the class that is also a bean respectively for the configuration, right? So this is why I have annotated with configuration, because the whole class is converted now to a managed bean, and that's why that is the magic of a Spring framework. This optimizes a lot because tells to the Spring context which are going to be the managed beans and which one of them are going to be retrieved any time that we want into our code project. But continuing with the job tasks of why did I annotate it with component annotation is that we want from the configuration class to scan all of the beans that are annotated with the component annotation. And this is necessary because Spring Framework needs to know which of the objects are going to be treated as beans. And that's why the configuration class here takes relevance into the topic, because the configuration will tell the Spring Framework which of the classes existing in the project are going to be treated as beans, so that the configuration class tells it to the Spring context, and the Spring context is aware of which objects are going to be treated as beans. And now, having that annotated, the job task is now into the Spring context. And let me tell you why I can assure you that the job task object is now treated as being, because I can retrieve it here in this code, the job task that is now into the context. How can I make sure of this? Because I am referring from the job task and I am taking the context object that I have defined here and getting the being. So it's already a being there. And I need to pass the type of the object that I want to retrieve. So here I am telling to the Spring framework which of the objects I want to retrieve that are into the Spring context. And so for this case, I am telling that I want to retrieve the object of type job task. And that's why I passed here this parameter. And with this line of code, I am now retrieving the object and I can access to its properties because I have reached all of this by annotating here the component, but with annotating here with just simply the action of the annotation of the component here, it's not enough because the configuration class needs to know what are the components that are needed to be treated as beans so that the application context can understand which are going to be the beans that we are being able to retrieve from our code. And you can see here that for the class of family task and study class are not annotated with a component as well. But I have intentionally did that. Why? Because in the same configuration class, the configuration class is also intended to issue beans to the application context, not just by scanning components as the way I have explained to you with the job tasks, but also the configuration class can issue beans singularly. And how am I able to tell you this? Because here with this annotation, take a look here. In the line 20, I am giving the annotation bean, and also I am writing here the method that is of type general tasks, and also I am issuing an object of study task. But how am I able to do that? But because study task is not, I am not issuing a being of a study task as well, but a general task. And let me tell you that I am able to do that because I am implementing here this interface. This is a concept that you may have already know here because this is a pure Java concept. So let me explain you that this is a very important feature because we are able to issue beans from a general perspective and not just focused on one. Because let's imagine this: if we want now not to issue here a study task object here, but a family task, we're just only be needed to modify this part of the code so that we can then issue family beans. But if I want to issue beans and not to be issuing a type of general task but a study task, I will now be needed to modify this, and other code that may have been around on into the project, making a decentralized place to modify, and very cumbersome process is surging there. So this is the advantage of issuing beans of the general type. So that's why I have created the interface here that you can take note of this. And also I am now issuing a bean. So the point here I want to highlight here is that I can either be issuing a beans from a method perspective or issuing a bean from a whole perspective of the class, treating not just a POJO, but now into a bean. And the magic here is that here I am treating the family task and the study task as POJOs, as normal POJOs. But by the time I try to issue beans from that POJOs, I am taking now from the perspective of the method to issue beans of that POJOs, but retrieving them anytime we want from the application context. And this is reached from the configuration class. And also you can see here that there are another method of general task, but now I am issuing a family task object. And you can see here that also I am issuing another being of family task, but this is also a concept. Let's imagine as a scenario that you want to retrieve two beans, but you don't specify the name of the bean that you want specifically to retrieve. You also give the type here, right? And there might be a conflict there for the application context to retrieve which one of the objects that you want to retrieve. Either because there would be all two objects here that are going to be stored into the application context, but Spring will not understand which type are you referring, because I want you to get clarified this concept. By the time that we retrieve a bean, we are telling first, as a first parameter, the name of the bean that is stored into the context. And what is the name? This is the name, study task. If I want to retrieve the study task bean that is stored into the application context, so in the first parameter, I will put the study task. That, in other words, you are going to be putting the name of the method that you have placed here to issue, in order to issue the bean. No more. It's just simply as that. And there here, as a second parameter, you will be telling the type of the object of the bean that is stored into the context. And then here you can access to the properties. It's just simply as that. And here I make the same. Now, the scenario that you only provide the type of the bean that you want to retrieve, because general tasks, there are multiple type of objects there of general tasks, right? And Spring will get confused of which one you are referring. So the primary annotation here we are going to take relevance, because this will tell to Spring context that this object will take a priority to instantiate and to retrieve back to our project. So when we are trying to retrieve a bean of general task here, Spring will understand that we are referring to this instantiation because it's annotated as a primary priority. So this is the basic explanation of what Spring is all about, and these are the basics, because when you are using Spring Boot is a module that also reaches and take leverage of these concepts. And if you want first to understand the Spring Boot model first at first glance, you need to understand first these concepts, and that's why I've made this video. So you can check all of this code in my GitHub repo that I have put into the description of this video. Thank you for having watched this video, and we're going to see in the next time. Bye.